Imagine a smart person who felt so guilty about telling his dark secret that he couldn't help it. The criminal world is shocked when a genius killer, who is known for being very smart, admits to his crime in the strangest way possible. When someone admits to doing something wrong, what makes them do it? And how does that reveal tear apart their whole carefully built life? Come along with us as we tell the exciting story of a genius who couldn't keep his secrets and find out how a statement that changed everything went down. In the year 1988, a heartbreaking crime took place in a tranquil hamlet located in the central region of Florida. This crime exposed the evil side of the human intellect. George Trepal, a man of great brilliance, was the mastermind of a nefarious scheme that resulted in the death of Peggy Carr and the poisoning of her family members, which came dangerously close to becoming deadly. The fact that this case, which is frequently referred to as the work of a genius murderer, serves as a sobering reminder of how intelligence can be used in the most terrible manner is frightening. A life of peace and quiet in Alturas. In 1988, the village of Alturas, Florida, which had a population of approximately 4,000 people, was a tranquil and picturesque place to live. Family groups that were looking for a serene life in the midst of ranches, lakes, and citrus trees were drawn to the area because of its reputation for tranquility. A blended family that included Peggy, her husband Pi, and their children from previous marriages was the Carr family. This family was one of the families that was included in this group. A mother named Peggy, who was 40 years old at the time, moved in with Pi at his big mansion, which was situated on a vast stretch of land. Pi had been a resident of Alturas for a considerable amount of time, and his property eventually became the residence of Peggy's children, Alan, Sherry, and Duane. Besides Pi's own children, Tammy and Travis, who also lived there, there was also a young child belonging to Tammy. To the dismay of their one and only neighbors, the large and lively family delighted in the wonderful lifestyle they had created for themselves. Increasing tensions and a letter that threatens to harm. The loud activities of the Carr family were a source of disruption to the tranquility that prevailed at Alturas. George Trepal and his wife Diana, who were their only neighbors, were not thrilled with the incessant noise that came from the restoration projects, loud music, and quad bikes. The Trepals participated in frequent passive-aggressive arguments and blocked Pi's building permissions as the tension reached a point where it was such that they blocked Pi's building permissions. In a letter that was typed and sent to the Carr family 4 months after they had moved in together, the letter contained the following disturbing message. You and all of your so-called family have 2 weeks to move out of Florida forever or else you will all die. It is not a joke at all. Even though it was a very concerning threat, they decided to disregard it as a joke perpetrated by a local troublemaker. A mysterious illness that affects Peggy Carr. On October 23, 1988, Peggy Carr started experiencing symptoms of illness. Her chest hurt, her legs hurt, and she had an odd tingling sensation in her wrists. She also suffered chest pains. Peggy's condition rapidly deteriorated, despite the fact that a medic at her place of employment and Pi's nurse sister confirmed that there was nothing substantially wrong with her. The doctors at the hospital were perplexed by her symptoms, which included a burning feeling that spread throughout her body. She was brought to the hospital on an emergency basis. Peggy's condition appeared to improve over the course of the subsequent few days, and she was eventually released from the hospital to go home. On the other hand, the following day, her son Duane and Pi's son Travis started exhibiting symptoms that were very similar to each other. In a short period of time, Peggy experienced a resurgence of her symptoms, and she was readmitted to the hospital, this time with an even greater degree of discomfort. A diagnosis of thallium poisoning has been made. The symptoms were now being taken seriously by the medical professionals, who brought in specialists who ultimately determined that the family had been poisoned by thallium. Thallium, an extremely deadly chemical that was originally employed in the production of rat poison, was an excellent match for the symptoms. According to the results of the tests, Peggy and her sons had consumed quantities of the toxin that were fatal. The state of Peggy's health has dramatically deteriorated. Despite the fact that they were gravely affected, Duane and Travis started making a sluggish recovery while she went into a coma and was placed on life support. In a tragic turn of events, Peggy's family took the agonizing decision to switch off her life support on March 3, 1989, after she had been in pain for several months. As the investigation gets underway, In the beginning of the inquiry into the murder, the police suspected Pi because of the fact that their relationship was relatively fresh, and there were rumors going around the village about possible marital problems. Pi, on the other hand, was swiftly eliminated as a potential suspect due to the fact that he and his children also had symptoms of thallium poisoning. The potential of poisoning by accident immediately came to everyone's attention. After conducting a comprehensive search of the Carr residence, the investigators seized hundreds of artifacts for the purpose of examination. The discovery of thallium residue in a pack of 8 glass Coca-Cola bottles that were kept in the kitchen of the Carrs was the moment that they made their breakthrough. An intelligent neighbor who is being suspected. The discovery came as a complete surprise to Pi, who made the observation that the family favored Pepsi over Coca-Cola. As a result, the detectives began to assume that the poisoned Coca-Cola bottles had been brought into their residence by an unknown individual. Almost immediately, attention was drawn to their sole neighbors, George Trepal and Diana, who were also their neighbors. George Trepal, a man who was smart yet lived a solitary life, had a troubled history. In 1975, he was sentenced to prison for operating one of the largest meth labs in the state of Florida. As a result of George's considerable knowledge of chemistry, he was a main suspect in the poisoning case, despite the fact that he had experienced a transformation. The Carr family and the way Trepal poisoned them. The method that George Trepal used to poison his victims was as treacherous as it was ingenious. Trepal was able to open the Coca-Cola bottles, add thallium nitrate to them, and then reseal them so that it appeared as though they had never been tampered with. He did this by utilizing his extensive knowledge of chemistry. In order to meticulously reseal the poisoned Coke bottles, he utilized a machine that was specifically built for the purpose of sealing glass bottles, a machine that he possessed. Trepal brought the bottles into the Carr household, fully aware that the family might consume them at some point due to the fact that they were present. This planned and determined deed displayed his cold-blooded approach to ensuring that his neighbors would suffer from the effects of the poison, which could take months to manifest, so postponing any instant suspicion or connection to him. He did this by ensuring that his neighbors would suffer from the consequences of the poison. The arrest and the covered operation, undercover. In order to obtain evidence, the authorities began a cunning operation that was conducted undercover. George was befriended by a law enforcement officer named Sherry, who pretended to be a new resident and a member of Mensa. Sherry and George formed a positive relationship over the course of several months, despite the fact that George never formally confessed to the crime. Nevertheless, the inquiry took a significant turn when Sherry was successful in obtaining a rental agreement for George's previous residence. This made it possible for the authorities to examine the property without first obtaining a warrant. When they entered, they discovered a dungeon that was soundproof, a large number of chemicals, and most importantly, a vial of thallium nitrate that was identical to the poison that was found in the Coca-Cola bottles. In April of 1990, George was taken into custody. The evidence was substantial, to say the least, despite the fact that his wife had protested and he had denied any involvement. Following a search of George's new residence, it was discovered that there was an additional dungeon, a guide to poisons, and apparatus for sealing bottles. The trial and the verdict of jail. In the year 1991, George Trepal was put on trial for the murder of Peggy Carr as well as the attempted murder of her extended family. Using forensic evidence, George's criminal history, and his understanding of poisons, the prosecution presented a compelling case that was supported by extensive evidence. It was determined that George was guilty of all charges, notwithstanding his self-assurance. Following the conclusion of the jury's deliberations on the death penalty, George was ultimately sentenced to execution via electric chair. Even though he is now 74 years old, George continues to appeal this sentence while he is on death row. A terrifying example of how intelligence can be exploited for malicious purposes is provided by the case of George Trepal. The fact that he had a broad grasp of chemistry, in addition to his precise preparation and execution of the crime, made him a difficult foe for law enforcement. But in the end, it was his own conceit and confidence in his own brilliance that brought about his downfall. This particular instance highlights the significance of maintaining alert and the necessity of conducting thorough investigations, even when dealing with crimes that appear to be totally perfect. The terrible death of Peggy Carr and the sorrow of her family serve as a somber reminder of the potential for darkness inside the human psyche, regardless of the level of intelligence that a person possesses. Intrigued by cases where brilliance meets betrayal? Hit subscribe and turn on notifications to catch more jaw-dropping stories like this one. Stay updated with our latest videos as we uncover the truth behind the most shocking confessions and crimes.